A little background information about me, Rob Warfield, is probably necessary to understand the rest of this story. Until I was about 14 years old, I was a juvenile delinquent. I constantly got into fights because I was tough, bullied many other kids, stole from stores and locales, and once stole a car with some older friends for several hours. At the age of 14, I was placed in foster care because my parents could no longer handle me. I know that many children have terrible experiences in foster care. Fortunately, that wasn't the case for me. My adoptive parents were big, tough, business people. I needed to stick to the line. My adopted father played lacrosse in college, and one of my adopted brothers, a year older than me, also played lacrosse. Working odd jobs allowed me to save enough money for a lacrosse stick. My adoptive parents pushed for me to join the lacrosse league, and I trained constantly with my brother and father. It turned out that I had grown to almost the ideal size for a lacrosse forward. Since I turned 18, I have stood exactly 6 star 1, 2, 5 barefoot, and 196 low B, 89 kilo, naked. Long story short, by the time I was 18 and a high school senior, I was good enough to get a scholarship to a Big Ten school. I started 3 years second to senior as an offensive lineman in college, earned a degree in electrical engineering in 4 years, and received a number of lucrative job offers when I graduated. I met my wife Jasmine, a marketing major at ACC shortly after I graduated. We got married when we were both 24 and enjoyed life as a highly mobile couple. My wife Jasmine and I met Evelyn Simmons and her husband Brett when we moved to North Carolina when we were both 26 years old in search of better jobs. Evelyn and Brett are 3 or 4 years older than Jasmine and I, and they were the most beautiful couple we had ever seen. Women's appearance is often exaggerated in stories, but this was not the case with Evelyn. I truly believe that at the time I met her since she was 18. Evelyn had never been in a room in her life where she wasn't both the most beautiful and sultry woman. I don't know much about men's looks, but judging by the women's reactions, Brett was pretty much in the same class as Evelyn as far as looks were concerned. Although I liked Evelyn, I admit that she was a little prim at first, but she was clearly also kind and sensitive. Surprisingly, she was almost shy, considering her appearance and the fact that she was really smart. Shyness was an unexpected quality. Along with Brett and Evelyn, we met socially with a number of other couples around our age in the Research Triangle area of North Carolina. Among them were Cindy and Dale, Sue and Rick, and Mandy and Carl. However, after we lived in North Carolina for a few months, Jasmine and our other friends seemed to change. They seemed to look down on Evelyn. I had a hard time understanding why until I realized it was jealousy when I overheard a conversation in my kitchen between Jasmine and 2 of her friends. I was working on a project outside the kitchen area of our home, and since it was a nice spring day, the windows were open. God, Jazz. Jazz is my wife's nickname given by her friends, although I never called her that. That bitch Evelyn really freezes me. You see my husband Dale drooling every time he's around her, Cindy growled. She's the sexiest bitch around and always seems to be strutting her stuff, Sue added. Rick and I had our biggest fight over her after he was even more obvious than Dale drooling like a lovesick bloodhound. Rob isn't that obvious, Jasmine chimed in, but like the rest of the troglodytes we're married to, I'm sure he stares at her from behind his ever-present aviator sunglasses whenever he's around that bitch. I'd love to knock her down, Cindy giggled while Sue chimed in, joining in on Cindy's fun. Tearing Evelyn off her pedestal and calling her all sorts of names that were both wrong and inappropriate continued for at least another 5 minutes before I got tired of it. I loudly announced my presence by bursting through the side door and into the kitchen, finally ending the slander party for now. Oh, hi Sue. Hi Cindy. I smiled pretending that I had just arrived. What's happened? Just a little girl talking. Jasmine smiled back, graciously allowing her to kiss her on the cheek. I chatted with them for a bit, drank a bottle of iced tea, and then announced that I was going to do some odd jobs right outside the kitchen window. Soon after Sue, and so the put Evelyn down party was over. The way these 3 were talking really pissed me off. This was especially hurtful because both Sue and Cindy had undoubtedly hit on me in the past. I can easily tell the difference between harassment and flirting, and this was a hit. And yet they called Evelyn, who I had no reason to think was promiscuous, a loser, a woman. I was also concerned about Jasmine's attitude. She had changed since we moved to North Carolina, or maybe the real she was coming out, because I never saw the evil snide side of her that I had seen for the past few months. Anyway, whenever our group of friends got together, the women never ostracized Evelyn in mixed groups because of how good-looking her husband Brett was. I tried to be as nice as possible to Evelyn to compensate for those subtle ways in which women avoided her. Evelyn never dressed particularly provocatively. She just had so much natural beauty, sultriness, and poise that she couldn't hide it. We had lived in the Research Triangle area for about a year when tragedy struck. Evelyn was in a serious car accident and ended up with significant facial injuries and had to have her left leg amputated below the knee. Even after months of plastic surgery and rehabilitation, she did not look well, in part because the left side of her face was covered in scars that no plastic surgeon, no matter how skilled, could completely correct. The saddest thing was how other women reacted to her accident. Although they seemed sympathetic in front of Evelyn, behind her, they seemed almost joyful. The way Evelyn was treated was not my only complaint. Jasmine had definitely changed. And by the time we had been living in North Carolina for about 18 months, I liked Brett, Rick, Dale, and Carl less and less every time I interacted with them. They all play football at small colleges, Division III, and somehow thought it was better than me playing lacrosse at a Big Ten school. I never tried to explain to them how naive it was. Athletes from the Power 5 conference, which includes the Big Ten, are typically in a much different class than Division III athletes. Jasmine seemed less affectionate than when we got married, much more snide and more concerned with material things. I talked to her about these changes, but she either explained that her ideas were just maturing, or that I was making them up, or that I was becoming more sensitive. As for the guys in our group, I only interacted with them when we had social events with our wives. I joined a recreational softball league, started taking tennis lessons, and made a different group of male friends who were easier to get along with. The first significant event occurred about 3 months after Evelyn's accident, and I visited her in the hospital several times, helped her connect with an excellent rehabilitation center, and she was fitted with a prosthetic lower leg. I was jogging in a local park when I passed a secluded grove containing a couple of benches and heard what I thought was sobbing. I paused my run, wondering if anyone was in trouble, and entered the grove. Evelyn sat on the bench and cried. I walked up to Evelyn, sat down next to her, and touched her hand before she even realized it was me. She flinched when I touched her hand, but when she saw that it was me, she buried her head in my shoulder and continued to cry. I hugged her and just let her cry for a few more minutes. After a few minutes, Evelyn had regained most of her composure, looked at me, wiped away her tears, and said, "I'm sorry you had to see my self-pity party, Rob. I understand you've been through a lot, Evelyn. If what happened to you happened to me, it would take me a long time to come to terms with it. I think I shouldn't be so superficial and worry about how my appearance has changed, or that I can't exercise like I used to, or wear clothes that show off my legs, which I used to vainly enjoy," she answered, smiling faintly. "You're not shallow, but you seem resigned. You don't have to humble yourself. You can have the same good life as before. Not with that terrible scar on her face," Evelyn snorted, turning her left side to me, "or with that artificial leg." She continued to bang on her left shin, which created a metallic sound. "That's where you're wrong, Evelyn," I continued. "You may not be in the 100th percentile in appearance like you used to be, but you're still not below the 98th. People with even greater needs for prosthetics than you are able to perform physical tasks just as well as ordinary people." Evelyn looked puzzled. "Why do you say that when you know damn well it's not true?" I looked disgusting. "At least Brett seems to think so." I chuckled. She hit me on the hand and swore, "Not funny." "Yes, it's funny," I replied, "because you're a beautiful, sultry woman that any man would be lucky to marry. And if Brett thinks otherwise, then he's the one being superficial." After a long pause, she remarked, "You must be blind." "No, in fact, I see very well. I'm lucky with my eyesight. I think you need to change your attitude. What I'm saying is, why don't we meet twice a week to work on your mobility? I will accompany you wherever you want to go, so that if you have any physical problems or feel any discomfort, I can help."